Video effects is a real art. Millions of dollars are spent on modern blockbusters to make sure they look beautiful and realistic. And for the most part, they do. Video effects artists have to know an unbelievable amount about the physics of light. And the amount of work that goes into creating even one emotionally realistic human face can be staggering. So you'd think with all that money behind them, movie studios would be able to get the best people for the job, right? Well, this isn't always the case. And while we all make mistakes, some of these blunders are just too glaring to ignore. Let's take a look at some of the funniest and most expensive movie effects fails to date. A little disclaimer before we get started. While CGI and video effects are related, they aren't the same thing. But for the purpose of this video, we'll look at examples of films failing at both. That out of the way, let's get to it. Peter Jackson readily admits that the Hobbit trilogy was rushed, strung out, and confusing, especially in comparison with the first trilogy. Much of the fighting seems like a blur, and a lot of this is to do with overcompensations made by the visual effects. Take the memorable barrel chase sequence where the dwarves escape pursuing orcs by floating down a river in large barrels. While the sequence is pretty fun, and they definitely had fun making it, it's not really believable. I found myself laughing as Bomber's barrel bounced along the river's edge in a way that seemed to have no grounding whatsoever in actual physics. Is it made of rubber or wood? The scene's light effects, specifically the edge highlights, appear artificially golden, an unnecessary glossiness that permeates the rest of the movies. In another example where physics was thrown out the window, a bridge falls out under Legolas, only for him to leap from stone to falling stone, which is essentially no different to flying. And yes, I know that elves are supposed to be light of foot, but it just looks ridiculous, don't you think? Speaking of ridiculous, let's have a look at our favorite womanizing space slug. In the 1997 special edition of Star Wars A New Hope, a scene left out of the 1977 original featuring Jabba and Han Solo was reintroduced. While the plot value of this scene is questionable, the quality of the CGI Jabba is comical. Blurry textures and clunky rendering make the supposedly sinister Hutt look sad and deflated. More like a throwaway video game NPC than a villainous space slug. And yes, I know it was 1997, but that was 4 years after Jurassic Park gave us an early masterclass in creature effects. The 2004 updated version of Jabba was pretty bad in its own way. Unconvincingly wrinkled and dark, the color grading of the entire scene had to be adjusted to fit the new model. So was it worth it? And which version do you prefer? Now Jurassic Park. I know what you're thinking. What is a masterpiece like this doing on such a list? It's a good question, because for all intents and purposes, Jurassic Park was really ahead of its time. A lot of the astounding dinosaur effects were down to the film's use of animatronics, and the groundbreaking CG can be partly attributed to careful use of specific directional lighting, which makes it much easier for animators to model light, as they only have to consider a single light source. This is particularly evident in the rainy T-Rex breakout scene. One of the only big mistakes in the movie was in fact a computer rendering error, and if you want to see it, I advise you not to blink. See if you can spot where it happens in this clip. Did you see it? If you did, you must have some pretty sharp eyes. I had to slow the video down to 25% speed in order to catch it. Now watch the raptor. Keep watching. There. For a single frame, the raptor completely disappears from the T-Rex's mouth. Crazy, right? The animators were very lucky that the computer bugged just when it was most difficult to notice. They were also lucky it was just the raptor, since a disappeared T-Rex could have taken them months to re-render. Somebody should tell Alan about these invisible raptors. How about a talking one? Alan. As a point of comparison, let's turn our attention to something more recent. Overall, Marvel's Black Panther was an incredible movie. It had great characters and costumes, high-octane combat, and a compelling storyline. What more could you ask for? Well, a good final showdown would have been nice. Opinions were divided on the movie's last battle between T'Challa and Killmonger, with many complaining that the CGI-heavy combat sequence seemed, well, not heavy enough. CG models that don't seem to have any real weight get a terrible rap from video effects critics because it makes the whole show feel cartoonish. Couple that with the poorly lit cavern where the fight takes place, lending no depth to the outfit textures, then you've really got a problem. The sequence was also animated using a virtual floating camera technique, which hasn't really stood the test of time since it was used in the first X-Men movie, back in the year 2000. Critics have taken issue with the choice to overlay the excellent work done by the costume department on the hero suits with excessive CGI enhancements. Chadwick Boseman and Michael B. Jordan both had custom suits made, so why weren't they used? Unbelievably, Boseman's suit was so heavily CGI'd in most parts of the movie that his head had to be rotoscoped onto a costume that already existed in real life. If you're not going to use your costumes, Marvel, I'd be happy to take them off your hands. Luckily for us, the main character in this next movie doesn't wear a costume, or any clothes at all. When Peter Jackson's new King Kong movie came out in 2005, everyone was blown away by its epic scale and mind-blowing video effects. My personal highlight was the fight between Kong and the T-Rexes, which was masterful in its combined use of motion capture and CGI. Andy Serkis, who played Kong, spent months studying gorilla behavior in Rwanda just to get the movements right. There are moments, however, where things get a little green screeny, and the biomechanics become questionable. Cue the dinosaur stampede. As the exploration party flees the stampede, we notice their lighting and definition change in a way that doesn't seem to match up to the scenario. Many of the extras in the scene turn into cutouts as they drop into the background. The best bit of the scene, however, which is coincidentally the most questionable in video effects physics terms, comes after the raptors turn up. Watch as this bold gentleman decides that the best thing to do when you're fleeing from dinosaurs is to start a fight with another one by kicking it in the head. While the kick looks really cool, it seems to in no way hinder this man's stride, which is funny because he happens to be kicking a velociraptor, an animal that would have needed to possess an extremely strong neck for biting and tearing purposes. Neither the CGI dinosaur head nor the legs of the actor take this into account. So, I'm sorry, Mr. Jackson, but you won't be getting away with this one. Here's another disaster the video effects team really shouldn't have gotten away with. In 2012, Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 2 was released. Critics were not overly impressed by the film's melodramatic soap opera type feel, which is pretty difficult to justify given the film's $136 million budget. One thing that sticks out about the two-part finale is the film's odd relationship with babies. Why, oh why, did they feel the need to CGI a baby into this scene? And a seriously creepy baby at that. I mean, it is a demon baby called Renesmee, but just look at that thing. The animation is totally unconvincing, and I'd even call it emotionally manipulative. The lack of ambient occlusion in the baby's hair and the fuzzy edge on the CG model detract heavily from any drama in the scene. In my opinion, they should have taken one look at that thing and said, "Bye-bye, baby. It's already given me nightmares." As we've just seen, vampire movies are some of the worst offenders when it comes to bad CGI. When Van Helsing was released in 2004, it set a high bar for questionable animation, which is pretty well evidenced by the disintegration of this harpy-like creature towards the beginning of the film. Even before she starts the shapeshift, it's pretty apparent that the CGI model is pasted onto a pre-filmed background, and the actress's head has been pasted onto that model in turn. The color blending and grading are sloppy, while the model's dull, blurry edges further detract from the viewer's immersion in the story. As the harpy vampire lady turns black and starts screaming, we're presented with a comical, vintage video game style skeleton, which thankfully doesn't hang around too long. For a film with a budget of $160 million, the effects really aren't good enough. So let me do us all a favor and put a stake right through the heart of this soul-sucking example of shoddy video effects. Just a couple years earlier, The Mummy Returns hit cinemas, receiving mixed reviews from critics, but bringing in a massive $433 million from its modest $98 million budget. There's a big part of me that thinks they should have spent the full 100, with every cent of that extra $2 million going to fix the animated monstrosity that was the Scorpion King. When Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson emerges from his tomb with a scorpion body, as one commenter pointed out, it looks like he's escaped right out of a PlayStation 2 game. And not a very good one. While the video effects genuinely stings my eyes to look at, I'm also grateful that such an unbelievably terrible and hilarious character model made it to our screens. Laughable animation was just part of life in the early 2000s, and part of me misses those simpler days when endgame boss battles were made so much harder by the fact that you were in stitches half the time. Following on from the video game theme, let's take a look at Sonic. Sonic the Hedgehog was a Sega video game classic, and I'll admit I was pretty excited when I heard they were making it into a movie. Until I saw the trailer, that is. The heavily anthropomorphized and cutesy version of the Sonic that the video effects team have put together has drawn quite a lot of criticism from fans of the game. The big problem is character design. The movie Sonic just doesn't look that much like the game Sonic. His small green eyes, cute nose, and tiny mouth feel like an attempt to humanize Sonic. But did he need humanizing? And don't get me started on the teeth. Those pearly whites give no indication of Sonic's viciousness and speed. Instead, looking like a false pair somebody had made at the dentist. He's a hedgehog, for Pete's sake. Give him hedgehog teeth. Thankfully, and a rare example of a movie studio giving in to criticism from the fans, Sonic director Jeff Fowler agreed to redesign Sonic's character. And even though the movie's release has now been delayed until 2020, I'm just glad this prickly CGI problem came to a speedy resolution. So which of these CGI blunders did you think was the most heinous? There are plenty of great examples that I didn't include here, so if you've got a favorite piece of terrible CGI that you think is worth mentioning, leave it in the comments down below. Thanks for watching.